Hi everyone, it's January 17th, 2019 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Live Special Edition. I'm your host, Erin Sapinka, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking with the people responsible for the University of Illinois Web Conference. The University of Illinois has a legendary history in technical achievement, with faculty and alumni creating such things as the first graphical browser, YouTube, and PayPal, to name just a few. This explains why the school is celebrating its 20th annual web conference in April 2019. But before we jump in, a quick word about our show. Higher Ed Live Special Edition is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using Higher Ed Live. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or you can take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to our podcast. The show included will be archived quickly after the broadcast ends and will be available in those archives later today. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Higher Ed Live is pleased to announce that the call for new hosts is open, so you can do what I'm doing right now. We're looking for higher ed education professionals who are currently employed at a college or university and work in one of the following areas: admissions, enrollment, marketing and communications, alumni relations, fundraising, or student affairs. We want to hear about your career journey and why you're interested in hosting a live webcast. Hosting live episodes is professionally rewarding and helps you grow your network. Applications are due February 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll tweet out a link with more information. And just as a side note, I absolutely love hosting these shows. I get to meet so many people and have a ton of conversations with people that sometimes I may not have connected with otherwise. And so I highly recommend getting involved. Now, to jump into our show, please join me in welcoming our guests. We have three today. We're joined by Tim Offenstein, Doug Burgett, and Jack Brighton. All three have decades of experience with the web and have been involved with the University of Illinois Web Conference for years. Welcome to the show. And I think to kick things off, if you could each go through and introduce a little bit about yourself and talk a little bit more about why you're involved with the conference this year and years past.
I'll start with me. I'm Tim Offenstein, and I work in technology services here at the University of Illinois. I've been here about 26 years, 27 years, and I concentrate primarily on web accessibility or software accessibility. I've been involved with the Webmasters from the beginning, and so we go back a ways. But I've worked closely with Jack and Doug throughout the years, and glad that Doug has invited me to be a part of our 20-year celebration. So that's my involvement for Webmasters at the moment.
Great. I'll go next if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm Jack Brighton, and I work at Illinois Public Media, which is the public broadcasting organization at the University of Illinois. It is part of the College of Media. We do PBS television and NPR radio, and also classical music. I started out as a journalist and media producer, and then when the web came along, I considered that an amazing thing that could help us extend our mission of education in the broadest sense around the world. So I got involved as a technical person at the station and managed the digital side of the operation for about 15 years. And I got involved in the campus webmasters, as we called them. This term webmaster is really fun because we all needed solutions and everybody was learning at the same time. So we can talk more about that. But the idea is that, you know, if we're in education, we're about sharing knowledge, and that's kind of what this whole thing is all about. And Tim roped me into it, so it's his fault. And then Doug has been fabulous. You know, he came along later and took it up to another notch. I'll stop there for now.
My name is Doug Burgett, and I work at the University of Illinois in the enrollment management area. And we do everything having to do with student recruitment, so that is a lot of web and digital work included in that. And I got involved, I've been at the university since about 2006, and got involved with the Webmasters shortly after that. I'm not sure if it was initially Jack's fault, and then taking over as the chair was Tim's fault. So both of you are at fault for some of it. and have been chairing for a number of years. But it was a great organization to get involved with. There's such a rich web community here at the University of Illinois. So we would put on what we used to call brown bags, which were kind of lunchtime talks here at the university for the web community here, to have some professional development opportunities or just sharing information like Jack said. So there were a lot of different things that we did, including our annual conference, which has evolved quite a bit over the years, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, most recently we've just been turning that event into to have a broader reach and to invite more people to it. And so it's a lot of fun to be involved with. You meet a lot of people in the involvement, and of course the web has evolved itself so much now that the topics we cover when we're sharing information, they're quite diverse.
I was going to say, I've had my eye on the web conference for about 2 or 3 years now, and every year I'm just so impressed with the breadth of things and sessions that are covered by it. I always dream of hosting, just even a day of professional development on campus for digital communicators, and it's such an inspiration to see something like that to grow into something so incredibly useful for so many different aspects of the web. Before we jump into the questions I've prepared, I wanted to remind our viewers that you can ask questions by using the hashtag HigherEdLive, and I'll do my best to bring them into the conversation when it makes sense. And always remember to look this up afterwards if you have to hop off before you leave in our archives at higheredlive.com. And so we touched on it a little bit, but can you walk me through the history? I mean, 20 years is quite the run for a web conference, especially in higher ed, where web may have gotten a slower start, or at least people dedicated to the web got a slower start. And so how did it really come together, that first conference 20 years ago? What did that look like?
Tim, do you want to take that one? You're kind of the
Sure.
founder / godfather of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's all my fault. No, actually, I would blame it on a fellow by the name of Hassan Aref. Back in 1999, he was the interim CIO here at the U of I. And somehow, and I still don't recall exactly, I got roped into a small committee. And his question for the committee was, I want to do something for the webmasters on campus. What do you suggest? And the timing was perfect because I had just started a listserv, a mailing list for all the campus all the campus webmasters. And I remember our initial membership was about 25, and then it steadily started growing from there. But at that time, I was a part of what we called Computer and Communication Services Office, or CCSO. And they had a conference on an annual basis that was for computer support for all of the IT people. And so I thought that's an excellent example of what we could do for webmasters. And so we began planning in 1999, and then on June 21st of 2000, we held our first conference. We didn't have a keynote speaker. We had just a discussion panel to start it off. We actually bussed our participants from the auditorium we were in over to one of the dining halls here on campus and gave them a big catered meal. And so we cobbled it together. I think we had maybe 100, 120 guests or participants. One of the things that we wanted to do was to build a community for the webmasters. If you may recall, the web kind of got started around 93, 94. And then by towards the end of 99, somewhere around there, it was really hitting its stride. And so there was a felt need for some kind of community where we could brainstorm together. People could compare notes and say, well, this worked for me or that didn't. And so this initial effort was with that in mind. And as Doug mentioned, one of our initial ideas were brown bags that we would hold on a monthly basis. Because an annual event just wasn't going to be often enough to really deal with a lot of the issues that the webmasters were having. And from the very beginning, accessibility was something we were interested in promoting, and it's reflected in some of the breakout sessions that we had in that first Webmasters conference. I think we only had 3 breakouts. But it was an area that seemed like a good venue for promoting best practices and accessibility. So we really tied into that initially. The other thing that we wanted to do was promote just general best practices. And so we held the Cool Website Awards for the first couple of years. And that was a blessing and a curse. We always got inflammatory remarks in our evaluations. Why did you pick that site? And so after a while, we eventually dropped the Cool Website Awards because it just was too controversial. But it was a way that reflected how we wanted to encourage best practices. We wanted to give kudos to those who were really doing a good job and putting forth a good effort. So for the first couple of years, it was kind of a learn as we go. And then eventually, I think after 3 or 4 years, I passed the chairmanship over to Jack, and he took it from there.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think initially it was very much a grassroots operation. That it wasn't like some unit of the university said, hey, we need to have a web conference and have these brown bags. It was more us who were doing the work, trying to figure out how the web worked, how to design, how to deploy, how to build websites, how to make them accessible. And we all were struggling because everybody was at that time. There was no instruction manual initially. So we all came from different backgrounds. Some were designers, some were IT people, others were journalists like me, who thought the web could be really important to the university and to our section of work in the university. So we decided to get together and just voluntarily share best practices, solutions, ideas, questions to try to answer this question: what is the web becoming? How can we be more effective at that? And that was the sort of spirit that Tim started the thing off with and that we carried forward. And I would say, we had a committee. We call it a Webmaster Working Group. We didn't want to even call it a committee. It was the most fun group of people, meeting-wise, that I've ever been a part of, because everybody just had so many great ideas and energy, and everybody was committed because they cared about it, not because they had to do it. So that was a really important dynamic in the whole way that we worked, and it just grew. It grew and grew. The listserv that Tim started, with 25 people, I don't even know, Doug. It had 500 when I was chair, and now, the web conference started out, as Tim said, with this, little thing, 3 breakout panels and no keynote, and now there are 3 this year, the 20th year, 3 keynote speakers, and I don't know, like 80 panels or something,
It's pretty schedule, and it's for 3 days or so, I think, if I remember correctly. 3 days. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that there was some sort of switch point there along the way where it was an internal event primarily. We had some outside groups and people that would attend that knew about it, and that was always increasing, it seemed, but we didn't promote it, and it had started as this internal thing to the university, so it naturally was kind of busting out of that format. And I think what really made our decision easy to switch it up into being a more regional event was we were struggling to get presenters. A lot of people wanted to come and see our keynote speaker, but for all these breakout sessions, there we'd have this kind of the same presenters every year because we were only pulling from people within the university. So that first year we said, let's invite other people to present, and that would really help even the professional development for people on campus, because they'd be getting experiences and information from other people. It was scary because we were wondering, is anybody going to want to present at this thing? But it was also very satisfying, because what was a struggle the year before to get presenters became so easy, and we were turning down so many people because we didn't have enough slots to fill. So people just came out of the woodwork from all over the country to present, and that's when we knew we really had something built that we weren't really taking full advantage of. And that was back in, I think, 2013. And since then, it's just grown a little bit every year, to the point where, we have a 3-day event now with, I think it's about 35. Jack, I like your 80 number, but I mean, it's about 35 breakout sessions. And then
let's just call it 80 anyway.
We can call it 80.
Yeah, all right.
And then, multiple keynotes that we bring in, and, try to get people who are doing something interesting within the web social industries, and that can kind of headline our events. So, it's just really grown from something like Tim was describing, which was just this community, and that community is still there. It's people talk about coming to this conference, from all over, and experiencing that community and that closeness that you experience at the conference. And I think that's nice. We could grow this conference to be bigger, but the size is nice. We sell out every year, and it's still small enough where you feel like it's a tight-knit community that's getting together just to share passion about the web.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've noticed some conferences beginning to struggle with, is that they've been sitting at this really nice, big but not too big size, and they want to increase size, or they want to continue to make it and improve it, and they sometimes try and make it bigger. But the thing that I love most about going to conferences is the fact that there's a good chance that I could pull the speaker or the panelist aside afterward at either an event or even in between at coffee breaks, grab drinks with them, and actually have time to communicate. Whereas the bigger conferences I've gone to, they're headed out to the next big speaking engagement, or, there's so many people trying to touch base with them that, even if you do like a quick, hey, hello, here's my business card, you don't really connect and actually have a resource. You have a really great presentation, but then, if you want to talk more or get even more advice from them or kind of share and swap stories, bigger conferences make that really challenging. So that small community focus thing, I think, is just so invaluable, and you don't realize how valuable it is until you go to one of the larger conferences and realize you haven't spoken to anyone but your own self or like the person next to you for 3 days. I did want to ask quickly, so you mentioned that it wasn't, an initiative from the university at first. How do you get buy-in, or how did you get at that initial buy-in, and then moving forward, how do you continue to get buy-in? I mean, now that it's grown to something so successful, it's kind of hard to argue that it, for whatever reason, isn't useful to the university. But how do you continue to maintain support from the university? Because I know across the higher ed space, lots of people are looking at trying to hold day professional development, even for their internal communities, and struggling to find the resources and the time and the support to plan those types of days.
Tim, maybe you could talk about the early days, and then we can talk about what happened subsequently.
Yeah, one of the I recall that right about the time we got started, a colleague of mine and I had attended the very first Netscape event with Mark Andreessen, and it was a huge kickoff thing in San Francisco. And the takeaway for me in that was T-shirts. We wanted to build an identity. We wanted to encourage this community feeling that, as Doug said, is still present. And so one of my excuse me, one of my initial ideas was to make sure that we had some way for people on campus to identify each other easily, and T-shirts was a no-brainer. But then we also did little things like giveaways of a keynote speaker's book or other things that the community would find useful. But from the beginning, although this was launched by the guy at the time that was the campus CIO, I really wanted this to be a campus-wide effort, that this would not be just one unit, the unit that I worked for. Interestingly, there were a few times in the history of this where I really had to go to bat and argue with my own unit that, no, we're not going to consume this. We need to keep it broad for everybody. And so I think that's an important component of buy-in, is to make sure that everybody is represented, everybody has an opportunity to bring their ideas to the table, and we can kick those around. And then when we get done, we've got a really nice campus-wide presence instead of just a single unit that may be responsible for various aspects, but we still want to keep it broad. And I think that was an important component from the early days. And down throughout the years, we've maintained that. Our steering committee membership is everybody on campus. Everybody is represented. And then that way, important topics that one unit might not be aware of is included from another unit.
I think Tim makes an incredibly important point there, that it was across the entire breadth of the campus. You had marketing people, you had programmers, you had designers, you had various communication professionals, a whole mix of disciplines that contributed to making the conversation and the events that we put on, the brown bags and the conference, diverse and useful to everyone, and we all learned from each other. The other thing that was really important is, we did have some initial seed money from the CIO, and that enabled Tim to have the conference, the initial conference, which, obviously conferences cost something. So that was really helpful, and that lasted, it wasn't a big pot of money, but it was enough to get us through the first 2-3 years. And then when I took over, we found that the campus IT group, which is now called Technology Services, was really interested in continuing the resource, which was really helpful. But with that, there were a couple episodes where there was a little bit of an attempt to take over the management of the Webmaster group and to make it part of an official unit of the campus. And we said, heck no, we're not going to do that. It was always a grassroots thing. And because it was that, people voluntarily gave a lot of their time and energy and creativity, as opposed to having to do it, like I said before. And we didn't want a boss to tell us how we should be doing this. We didn't want someone coming in and managing what we were doing. And there was a danger of that. And actually, I can tell you a couple stories if we have time. They're kind of amusing. But we resisted it successfully. And, so then Doug took it over and, like I said, took it up a notch and really developed the conference into something with lots of sponsors, and it generates its own resources at this point. I believe, we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that the campus buy-in has always been kind of an interesting subject, because it looks like, I think from everyone on the outside coming in, that this is University of Illinois conference, and that the University of Illinois puts it on, which is true, but it's the people of the University of Illinois, and it's certainly not the leadership of the University of Illinois. We always have to, remind the university that this is going on and that their name is on it, and that's it's an interesting dynamic. But of course, you talk to people at the university who don't necessarily have anything to do with it, and they're aware of it, and they're aware of the perception of it and the positivity of it. And honestly, to create buy-in right now is quite easy, like you hinted at, Aaron. I mean, it's just for our web community here to have a conference that is so reasonably priced that you don't have to travel to. That alone is an amazing thing for everybody in the web community here at the University of Illinois. So we're real privileged to have that going on. But yeah, it's been it's always an interesting thing to see what the dynamic is like from university top level buy-in with what it actually is, what's happening in the back end, how the sausage is actually made. It's quite different from what you'd expect, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it bears mentioning that the conference, the keynotes have always been like the stars of the web community. Eric Meyer, Steve Krug, Jared Spool, David Weinberger. These people, we didn't pay them much, but they were also interested in contributing to the educational aspects of the web. So the spirit of it has always been about that.
Yeah, I remember Steve Krug took a big hit on his usual conference fee just so that he could come and share with us.
And that's fairly typical. Like, I think, I don't want to be known as the event where keynotes come to not get paid, but I mean, they always have a soft spot in their heart for higher ed. We don't have a lot of money to deal with. It's always nice when a keynote's willing to lower that price a little bit for us.
Yeah.
First of all, I really love the web community, because that's the thing is that I've just noticed over the years, you put out a call for just even questions. I participate in several, running Twitter chats of people. I work primarily in social media and digital communications. And so, there's a couple of hashtags on Twitter that I follow. And whenever I toss out a question, I get answers within minutes usually from the higher ed community, because everyone's just so willing to share, and they're all familiar with the different struggles that we deal with, whether it's policy, resources, anything really, like the different beast that is higher ed when it comes to the web. And so it's always really exciting to see that come together in more ways than just sharing stuff on the internet, but actually donating time and expertise to these spaces. Looking at this year's conference, what's kind of the thread or the theme that you've seen throughout the different sessions? What was the most talked about, or the topic of highest interest in this year's schedule and the submissions?
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever one that stands out, and that's what's interesting about looking at the 20-year history, is that we're still talking about accessibility. We're still talking about redesigning your website. We're still talking about CSS and the programming resources and things like that have changed, but we still have a programmer-centric track. We still have a front-end designer track. Social media was one thing that didn't exist then, and kind of came up as a separate thing on campus. Social media people started kind of their own grassroots group similar to the Webmasters, but it came about so quickly, and they struggled with the same things that we had struggled with, and had since figured out that at one point it just made sense to kind of combine it all together, because we didn't really see there being this hard line in between people who work with social media and people who work on the web. There was just so much overlap that we then just kind of we merged the two together, and we have this social media aspect, to our conference now. But yeah, I started blabbering. Now I forgot the question. What was
Where
was I going with this?
What trends did you see in the submissions for panels? I liked where you were going. But
yeah, I got off on a tangent. Yeah, so this year, something new kind of pops up every year, and this year, we had something in there in regards to chat bots and voice recognition, things like that. That's kind of the newer topics that are in there, and of course, like I mentioned, there's always some sort of new tool or process or resource available for the back end, how people get things done, and the efficiencies of how we all do our work, and those things are always talked about. But they're really, from year to year, there's never a more popular topic than anything else. And that's the beauty, I think, of this whole, putting everything together that's kind of web related. It's got longevity to the topics, and it's interesting.
I'm just looking through the program right now, and one of the things that, I'm noticing is there's a really great variety of sessions and things like that. So I know we've talked about the web community, but what's the typical audience look like in the past couple of years for this conference? Do you have webmasters, obviously social media managers, people? What about like admin assistants that are also in charge of updating the website? What does your audience and the people that attend look like for those of us who maybe might be picking a conference for the first time or a little nervous about going to something called a web conference versus, communications conference or a writing conference?
So yeah, I'm sorry, Doug, do you want to say?
No, go ahead, Jack.
Well, okay, so I think it's all those people and more. And that's one thing about the web, and I think web related is the term that Doug used. We are in a situation now where there are a lot of skills that go into websites, web development, design, deployment, social media, marketing, etc. And now, we're going to have voice recognition, AI, a bunch of stuff. So, the more disciplines we can bring to that, the better we can understand what this thing actually is becoming, from where it came from. And essentially, understanding the other people and what they do is really important as well. Like, for a designer to understand what a programmer does, or what UX is, or what accessibility requires. All these are topics that we all need to learn from each other about. And I think that happens naturally at an event like this. So it's all kinds of walks of life that people come to bring to this.
One thing I would add to that I admire Doug for doing is the keynote speaker selection has not been just strictly what we would think of in terms of web-centric. They're broader than that. And so they bring a real good flavor to the conference. So there's, various keynotes that will talk about various social topics. And it gives us a way to kind of blend those into what we're doing. And I've liked that direction in the past few WebCons.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look at the potential keynote speaker list and see who speaks at conferences and who is in the industry. And that, the examples that Jack threw out before of the early people like Jared Spool or the people who are really integral in maybe the early days of the web, it's seemingly more clear who those pioneers were at the time, because the community maybe was just smaller. But now it seems like everybody and their brother is a potential keynote speaker. And there's just a lot of different people talking about a lot of different things. And you can really dig deep on the internet and find people who you may never have heard of, but are talking about some really interesting things. And we found that it's not the names that we put out there so much as it is how interesting the topic is and just how good of a speaker they are.
As we're getting towards the end of our broadcast, I have two last questions that I think we'll do kind of like in a rapid fire. So the first one is, what session, topic, anything are you looking forward to the most about this year's conference? And then when we get through that, what's your best elevator pitch to help us convince our bosses that WebCon should be on our professional development for this year? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll throw a few quick things in there. I always enjoy discussions on security. And so I'll be watching for topics on that. And then accessibility is my primary focus here at the U of I. So I always try to tune in to particularly speakers who are coming from outside the campus to see what that fresh perspective is. So those are the kinds of things I'll be watching for.
Yeah, I'll go next, and then Doug can wrap that question up. I am increasingly concerned about the direction of the web, in particular social media. I think there is a downside that has become more and more apparent, and I think we need to be talking about that. So there's going to be one of the keynote speakers, Sophia Noble, who wrote this great book called Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, and some of the social justice aspects of what happens on the web and what are the values that we're bringing to the technology we're building that we're not consciously thinking of, but influence how it shapes us, you know, how it plays out in our communities and our democracy and our educational environment. Those are the social aspect issues that I'm really increasingly interested in, and I think this conference in particular is going to, you know, be talking about that in addition to, you know, accessibility and you know, how you do design and programming.
This might sound like a cop-out answer, but I can't pick a favorite session that I'm excited about. I like to see every year, and what excites me most about it is to see the diversity of topics and people that come together. And every year, that's a different mix of things, and it creates its own unique feel for that year. And so I'm looking forward to the same thing that I look forward to every year with this event, and that's to see how that mix of topics and people feels when it comes together, and what creates the special feeling that will be remembered as the 20th year.
I have to say, I always try and trick the conference chairs into telling me what they're most excited about, so that then I can make sure to put it on my list, or like to follow up with notes, or to make sure it's a session that I would go to. So just a quick thing, very quickly. You mentioned, being concerned about where the web is going, and Jack, I just reminded me that I'm reading a book right now, Technically Wrong, Sexist Apps, Biased Algorithms, and Other Threats of Toxic Tech. And it's been something I've noticed at conferences over the past 2 years, is this trend of, oh, it can get really evil. And then you saw, obviously, the burst with the Campaign Analytica stuff. And then also, I think, also the self-care of it. I'm seeing that as an increasing trend too. And so I'm interested to see how 2019 conferences kind of look at, the actual technology kind of evil side of it, but then also the mental health, self-care as people that work on the web, and something that never ever sleeps aspect of it. And I think that's going to be a really interesting trend in 2019. So I'm going to look through your schedule, and if there are any very good ones related to that, I want notes from all of them. And then finally, my last question, the elevator pitch. How do I convince my boss that I should come to Illinois this April?
Tim?
I'm drawing a blank.
Okay, I'll go first. Take a moment, gather your thoughts. This is where the entire web community moves forward at the University of Illinois. This is how we get better. This is one of the key events where we all learn from each other, and as a community improve how the University of Illinois, and actually all educators, anyone involved in higher education, learns more about how to use the web for good, for education, public service, and engagement with the communities we serve. And it really is a place where the community who are doing the work gets better as a community to do the work.
I would add to that it is not hard to predict that the web is just going to continue to expand. I mean, we've got the last 20 years to look at how it has basically taken over. We can't live without the web now. And that is not going to stop. In fact, that's going to accelerate. And so it is critical. It is fundamentally critical that we stay abreast of that. And one of the things about this particular conference I like is that it stays abreast. It's always looking for the latest and the greatest and the cutting edge. And we cannot afford to not be a part of that and not be knowledgeable and aware of what those things are going to be like with social media and security and accessibility. Those are all areas that we cannot afford to slow down and take a step back at this point.
I would add in there, for an elevator pitch to your boss, the cost. Our conference, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I think that our aim has always been to deliver the same value, but at a more reasonable cost. And it's not because we purposely want to keep it like that. Again, the 20 years of history have brought us here. It used to be a free event. And the first year we charged everyone $10, and they pretty much showed up with a $10 bill and just gave it to us on the way in. So, I mean, it's evolved from that. And we see the benefit of having people come together and share their experiences, but also just make it accessible through a low cost. A lot of people can't afford conference price tags these days, and to travel to these places and the lodging, it all adds up, and it's quite a price tag. So this is a very reasonably priced event for all of those of us in higher ed who don't have any money.
And so I usually can get one conference sponsored through work, and then any additional ones I try to self-fund or volunteer at. And I've always kept this one on my list because the price is unbeatable. And whenever I look at a new conference or something, I always pick either the transportation to get there or the actual entry fee to figure out how realistic it is. And if either one of those cross a threshold all by itself, then I know that one's out the window for that time being. That brings us, though, to the end of our show. And I just want to say thanks, as always, to our program sponsor, M. Stoner. A huge thank you to my guests, Tim, Doug, and Jack, for joining me today. And as always, a huge thank you to our viewers for tuning in and spending your afternoon or whenever you're listening to this with me. I'm your host, Erin Spinka. See you all next time.